Well, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. I think we're live for Nubia Fest 2020. And this panel is called the Nubian Past Scholars Building Community. And so my name is SHAYLA MONROE. I am a graduate student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And the panel you see in front of you, this is kind of a reunion of sorts. We were all together in 2018 at the International Society for Nubian Studies conference in Paris. And during that time, we bonded and, well, some of us already knew each other, but we bonded and we had really powerful experience sharing our experiences being scholars of Nubian studies who are also people of African descent. That's a very particular experience that we share, and I think we kind of treasure the meaning inherent in that, and it has led to lots and lots of discussions about what we do and how we see meaning in what we do. So the way we conceptualize this panel is that each of us would speak very, very briefly about our research and about, building community. And then we would open this up into a more fluid discussion, like I said, about the meaning behind this research. And there are plenty of historians, archaeologists, linguists who they do their research, they get their credit for it, and it is a research profile. But there is something about working with Nubian studies that makes this way more than research. The meaning behind this is much more than building a profile. So hopefully we can kind of tease that out and talk about what that means for all of us. So do we want to do just kind of like quick intros and then I'll do my little flash talk? Start off?
Sure. If you want to do it that way, that sounds good.
Okay, who wants to go? Should we go in order of my screen or? So the next person on my screen is Deborah Hurd.
Who may be frozen.
Okay. So let's slide over to Ann Jennings.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm an anthropologist. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I did my field work among the Egyptian Nubians living near the town of Aswan. And those of you who've been to Aswan know that there are several Nubian villages surrounding the town. And so it was in one of those villages that I lived for. The first time was for a year and a half. Second time was also for another year. And then periodically I went back and forth. I didn't stay for a whole year in the other times. I only stayed for a couple of months here, a couple of months there. So anyway, so I'm going to be talking about the Nubian village women who I knew and what their lives were like.
Okay, Deborah, can you hear me? Okay, so Deborah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So I can hear you. Maybe you can give an introduction for yourself.
All right. I may need to turn my video off.
Okay.
All right. So my name is Deborah Hurd. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago. My research is right now looking at temples in Upper Nubia dedicated to the gods Amun and Apetamak. I'm looking at and comparing inscriptions as well as the archaeology of the temples to see what they tell us about social responsibility. So I'm combining linguistics with the archaeology to try to come up with a formulation of social relations in ancient Nubia.
Okay. The next person on my screen is Salim.
Yes. Greetings. Hello, everyone. Glad you all joined in with us today. I'm Salim FARAJI. I'm a professor of Africana Studies here in Southern California, California State University, Dominguez Hills. Again, I teach in the Department of Africana Studies. My research in Nubian studies is pretty much focused on the book, my book that came out in 2012, called The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh. And in that book, I primarily look at what's considered quote unquote post-Meroitic culture or late Meroitic culture, as well as the early Christian period. So I look at the transformation of ancient Nubia between the 4th and 6th century. So in doing that, I provided a survey of Nubian history as well. And so I'll be talking about that later. And then my latest research is actually the Kerma Kingdom during the second intermediate period of ancient Egyptian history, as well as the Middle Kingdom. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm glad to see my colleagues. And again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Okay, the next person is Solange.
Okay, I'm Solange Ashby. I have a PhD in Egyptology from University of Chicago. I'm currently teaching at University of Nebraska, Omaha in their Black Studies department. I wrote my dissertation on the Nubian prayer inscriptions found in the Egyptian temples of Lower Nubia. So my time period, 1st to the 5th century CE, kind of overlaps with what Salim did. And so we can have some good conversations about what Nubians were doing religion-wise in that period. And I'm also really happy to be with this great gang from the Nubian Studies Conference in Paris.
Okay, and last but most certainly not least, we have Tristan.
All right, greetings everybody. So I'm Tristan. I'm just excited, very excited. Very excited, man. Nice to have this kind of reunion. But anyways, let me actually introduce myself too. So I'm Tristan Samuels. I'm a PhD candidate in Africology at Temple University. My dissertation research focuses on looking at the ancient Egyptian language from the perspective of Afro-Caribbean languages. Within the context of Nubian studies, I look at basically the paradigms and concepts that we use to explain cultural relationship between Nubia and ancient Egypt. I really focus on that. I guess I would say it's roughly what's called the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, that 25th dynasty, those two types of things, those two types of eras, and also the so-called Hellenistic period. I have issues with that, but we'll get into a discussion. But I think everyone knows what I mean. I'm just being very general. All the controversial things, basically, in a lazy way to explain it. So that's me.
Okay, and as you'll see in my flash talk, my name is, I already said that. So I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I am a zooarchaeologist, which I know is really weird. So I I study animal bones and the relationship of people and animals in the past. And so I work at the Third Cataract, and I'll talk just a little bit about, my research and what that's meant. Okay, so I'm going to. Did someone say something? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to just share the screen right quick so I can go through this quickly. Oh, okay. Slideshow. Okay. Okay. So I'm sorry. Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, how scholars kind of build community and tell you a little bit about myself. So one of the sites that I work in and study is in Kerma, but I realized that sometimes people don't actually know what we mean when we say Kerma. So Kerma was an ancient society in northeastern Africa, and it's about 12 kilometers upstream from the third cataract of the Nile. I'm going to put up a map in just a moment. So Kerma began to develop around 3500 BC when Saharan pastoralists migrated into the middle and upper Nile Valley and started to form communities with people who were already living in the area. And they were what we call a heavily cattle-centric cattle and other smaller bovids were really important to them. So they're on the left bank of the Nile River near the Third Cataract. So the time frame that we're looking at is about 3500 BC to 1550 BC. And they're well known for these display of cattle bucrania on royal tombs. So we call the skull, when you just take the skull of a cow and you use it as a display, we call it a bucrania. And some of the royal tombs in the Kerma society were adorned with hundreds of bucrania. And I think that the largest tomb bore a display of about 4,000 bucrania. And so they were really dependent, on their cattle herds for meat, dairy, leather, and also bone that comprised a lot of their tools that they used in daily life. And so here's a map, and that's where Kerma is right there. So one of the sites that I work at in the Third Cataract is called Abu Fatma. So Abu Fatma is a non-royal cemetery that was active from around 2500 to 1500 BCE. We carried out 2 excavations there from 2015 to 2017. We found 3 goat sacrifices, 2 young rams that were sacrificed, and also 1 dog. And here is the dog. And this was in situ before we actually excavated the dog. So one of the cool things about the animal burials at Abu Fatma is that they fit the pattern for animal burials in the Eastern Necropolis, or the big royal Kerma cemetery. So we have these continuing research questions about what we're looking for at Abu Fatma. We will be going back looking for more animal burials. We see that depending on the type of animal that determined how the animal was treated in its burial, goats were treated like food, but sheep were buried whole and they weren't given really a culinary treatment. And the dog was also buried with its collar in a manner of a companion animal. And so the placement of the remains within the graves in terms of where they are, their spatial orientation, and their orientation in terms of cardinal direction, and also their relationship to human remains aligns with that of the royal cemetery. So what we now know is that the way that animals are buried in those royal tombs is not necessarily just created for royalty, but this is a culture-wide practice of the way that animals are buried in the tombs. And also the consistency over time and geographic space suggests an institutional ritual authority. We don't have written records from the Kerma period, but we do know that Kerma society had some sort of institution that was passing these traditions along for very long periods of time. And that meant that whenever people would conduct these rituals, there had to be some group of people that was responsible for them getting it right. So Tombos is where I started working. I still work at Tombos. I excavated there this January. Tombos is also at the Third Cataract. It's about 10 kilometers north of Kerma. So the tombs at Tombos are from an Egyptian New Kingdom colony, and they go from
Shayla,
the New Kingdom to the.
Shayla,
I'm sorry.
we can't see your screen, the audience or your co-panelists.
Oh, you can't see it? Anything?
No.
There's a circle like it's trying to load, but it seems like it hasn't.
Oh, that's so sad. Okay. Okay. Well, I guess sorry, I don't really know what to do. So I guess I'll just finish. I'm sorry you guys can't see this. So Tombos is an Egyptian New Kingdom colony, and it goes from the New Kingdom to the Nabatean period. The main research questions there concern Egyptian Nubian entanglement. And what we see at Tombos is a mix of Egyptian and Nubian burial practices and religious motifs. So we really do see people taking these traditions and kind of mixing them up and with, kind of a hybrid community that's where people are, regardless of their birth, kind of taking traditions and what looks like is they're making personal choices about which areas in their lives to express kind of Egyptianness or Nubianness. So here's a picture you all can't see of the community. It's a picture of the people who work with us at Tombos. So this is what makes everything really worth it to me, is being able to.
Shayla, could you try?
Well, why don't I just end the slideshow?
Unsharing the screen.
I can't really see. I'm not really sure how to make that happen. Oh, let's see. Maybe I can start again. Okay, so let's try. Okay. Let's try this again. Do you see anything?
No.
Oh, it's so sad. It was up there. I tested it before we started, and it looked like it was fine. Okay.
You do have a question though, Shayla.
I do have.
Does that dog represent Yinpo?
And that I do not know. I guess I haven't ventured into thinking that the dogs represented any particular entity, because so in the royal cemetery, the burials of the dogs are positioned in an extremely symbolic way. You have your human interment, you have a couple of sheep that are positioned behind the human, and then you have the dog positioned behind the sheep, sometimes even positioned in position as if to depict their action of hurting. So clearly in the royal cemetery, with some of the more elaborate kind of placement, the it looks like the dog's significance is because of the way that they help human beings care for their herds, be they herds of small stock or herds of cattle. And so with this particular dog that we found, the orientation was similar in some ways. I think it was like on a different side, but there were no other bovids in the tomb with the dog. But the dog had its collar on, so and the dog was also elderly. So my guess was that the dog was a companion animal to the human. And so when the human passed away, the dog was placed like with the person that it lived with. And the collar was cute. It was like a little artful leather collar. So that's kind of what I'm going with now. But there's so much work to be done in terms of iconography, because you know, all of these burials have to then kind of be cross-referenced with the artwork to kind of see what are those bigger themes and motifs that you know, might be represented by the dog. I think there's an entire world of research to be done there. So. And so that was it. The only thing else I really had was showing y'all pictures of all this food that I ate while I was in Sudan. That I eat every time. And essentially just talking about what happens in the off hours of that research, how we are constantly cared for and loved on and fed by the community where we live. We have several times been fed so much that our hosts were sitting there just waiting for us to fall out. Because that's what they like. That they like to feed you so much that you just like tilt over. Some of the best meals I've had in my life were from Sudan, with Nubian women just putting their foot all in it, and just there's no shame on my part. I'm a woman who eats, so I'll be over there just doing it. But Iman has a question: are there any connections with the Ona culture in Eritrea carving bullheads similar to the Bucrania? I would not rule it out, and here's why. The veneration for bulls, cows, and the particularly using their skulls. We know that in the Nile Valley, it goes back at least to 12,000 BC. So this predates the presence of domesticated cattle on the continent. Toshka was the first place where, even before these cattle were domesticated, people were hunting wild African cattle, African Bos primigenius or Bos primigenius africanus. And they were hunting these wild cattle, and they were taking these skulls and they were putting them in special placement on these human internments. So this goes back. And so when you think about something that goes back to 12,000 BC, and then from there, it is that veneration is spreading in both directions, spreading across the Sahara, what was, you know, then the grassland, spreading down the Atbara, etc. And so the rock art that we see connected with these cattle, not only does it go across the Sahara, but it actually goes through the Horn of Africa, and we find similar rock art across the Red Sea. This is an enormous phenomenon. This idea of using cattle as some sort of mediating force between humans and the unseen world. And so because it was just so, because it was so widespread, I wouldn't rule out, you know, any connections at this point, because this was a phenomenon that just swept up, you know, across a wide swath of the continent from east to west.
Mhm.
And so we can look at my food pictures later, but at the end of the day, you know, that's my research. And I also had some wedding pics, because that's another one of my favorite things to do when I'm in Nubia is weddings. You know, Nubian weddings are lit and wonderful and amazing. And I'm always hoping that we get to go and dress up and go to a wedding and join in the festivities. And we are always welcomed and embraced and invited to participate in their joy and in their celebration. And to me, that's some of what makes being a researcher of Nubian studies a more holistic experience. Because not only are we theoretically working more towards like co-creation of knowledge, you know, trying to pull in more Nubian perspectives, more modern Nubian perspectives, to hear, you know, their own views and kind of participate in their journey in, you know, towards uncovering and reclaiming their past. But also there's friendship and there's sisterhood and there is kinship and there's so many other things that kind of come from doing this work and traveling there to do research and to get to know these communities. So with that being said, I don't know who wants to go next and maybe have a little bit more luck than I did.
SHAYLA, I have a question. You said your focus was on 2500 BC to when?
So that's Abu Fatma. So Abu Fatma is like 2500 to 1500.
Okay,
In
great.
terms of my research, I've been a little bit all over the place. I have been Abu Fatma, Mahal. Yeah, I'm gonna make a fool out of myself trying to read this.
Dima, help us out.
Tamabs?
It says Abu Fatma is the entrance.
Yes, okay. Tumbos, okay. Oh, that was sad, y'all.
Hey, you were almost there.
Yeah. So when we work at we work at Abu Fatma, it's we work at Abu Fatma. It's maybe not even a 10-minute ride. It's like really just right down the road from our field house in Tumbos. So it's a close community. It's like a neighbor community. And this was saying, like, I kind of mix all over the place. So the earliest stuff I've done has been Neolithic. My dissertation research is focused on Middle Kingdom because I'm focused on the Sea Group pastoralist for the dissertation. But I show up wherever I'm told to show up. So if I'm told to show up at Abu Fatma, if I'm told to show up at Tumbos, so all in all, I've done everything from Neolithic animal remains all the way up to Napatan. Okay, so who wants to go next?
I was told I should go next.
Okay.
I'm also going to riff on the cattle and milk.
Oh, right, yeah.
I will now attempt to share my screen. Say a silent prayer for me. Uh-oh. Let's see. Okay. This is very weird. It is quite different than what I'm used to, but let's see if this is going to work. Chrome needed permission to capture my screen. Ay, ay, ay. Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys.
Okay, but at some point we are all going to be experts on all of these platforms.
Just be patient with me. I think this is the first time for all of us using this particular platform.
Right.
Right. So, yeah.
And it's asking something more than I am figuring out how to do. System preference, security, privacy. Okay, let me try one more. Okay, let's see if that will work. Until it's quit. Oh my gosh. It wants me to quit the screen.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay, we're waiting. We're after you return, and I'm sure she's figuring it out. And of course, Shayla was talking about her experiences and memories on archaeological excavations in the Sudan at Tumbos and other places. And 2 years ago, we were all together in Paris, right, for the international.
She's back.
All right, great. Solange back. I was just about to ask us to share some Paris stories.
Maybe I'll just attempt once more to share the screen and see if that's actually going to work. And if not, then I'll just kind of fudge through it without images.
All right, let's see.
Oh, there's something.
There's something.
Yes, but it's more than I want. I'm afraid that if I...
Oh, look, it's infinite. Wow, there's like an infinite.
Okay. Okay. Solange, sorry, tuning in here. Okay, so when you hit the screen share, it'll give you the option to pick the actual application for the screen share. Just use the PowerPoint, and I think you should be able to see the tabs at the top. Alternatively, you can send me the PowerPoint, and I'm happy to navigate it from back here.
You know what? Let me just do that, Dima, because this is like, I can't.
Yeah, send it to me.
Okay.
In the meantime, Salim, you were saying memories of Paris.
Yes. We just had so much fun. At least I thought we did. Is that correct?
Yes.
We had a lot of fun. You know, the restaurants, touring Paris, the museum,
and taking pictures that you exclude me from.
You're not going to let that rest.
Nope.
You're not going to let that rest.
Nope.
Wow. That was completely unintentional. I did not see what Dean was talking about is that we were like, I guess, in the main square or court of the Louvre, and we were taking photographs. So we were taking group photographs. So I was trying to get everyone together. I think what Dima forgets is that it was incredibly difficult to get everybody's attention to take a photo, even for 1 second, because we were all involved in our own silo conversations, right? We were all hobnobbing, moving. And so I'm like, okay, we got this group together for a second. Let's take this photo, right? And so we took a photo. And by the way, I did not take the photo, right? I couldn't have took the photo. I was in the photo. So I don't know why she's blaming me, right?
Because you said, let's go, and you missed it. Salim, we were like 10 or 12 Black people in that conference. You could have waited for me.
I know. That was a major oversight. So we took the photo, and she's in the photo, but she's not in the photo because she's in another conversation, doing whatever she was doing, and I know it didn't look good. So that's my bad. It's still all love. It's all love.
Yeah, I might not be in it either, but I don't like taking pictures, so I'm okay.
Yeah. So, but we had a lot of fun. We saw a lot, while we were there. The presentations, like Dima said, it's about a dozen people of African descent, and half of those maybe us born in the U.S. Right. So in fact, I think it's just us 6 right here in terms of attending this conference and even being a member of that organization, right? And so these are Nubian studies scholars and specialists from all over the world, which, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Europe has the edge in terms of the number of Nubian studies archaeologists. I mean, of course, we're at Harvard, MFA, my hometown, University of Pennsylvania, right? The museum there, Philly, University of Chicago. And I really think that's it in the US in terms of Nubian collections, Nubian studies scholarship, archaeology, and so forth. I think everything else, and even when I first came into this discipline in the mid to late 90s, like 96, in terms of formal Nubian archaeology, right? Of course, I heard of Nubian, been studying Nubia, but I'm talking about formal Nubian archaeology. Might have been like 96. And the person who brought me in was like, look, this field is dominated primarily by European scholars, right? The Polish, French, British, Swiss, Germans, right? Not a lot of American scholars, except for the Jeff Emberlings and the Stuart Tyson Smiths and so forth, and others, and then certainly us coming into the fold and bringing, and what we bring is new perspectives and new viewpoints, right? From the discipline of Africana studies, from African-centered scholarship, even Africanist research, right? Which is amazing that there's not even a dialogue with even Africanist scholarship as well. And so I think that we bring in those perspectives, those viewpoints that have not been really considered before in Nubian studies. So
it looks like we got a PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm actually sharing it or if that's Dima's, so I'm afraid to click on stop sharing on my end. Should I, let me just see if I can control it from here. Did that just end it, or can you guys see my slide?
It's back again. It's back again.
Okay, so let me let me do my thing. So I'm gonna set a timer so I don't go too long. I'm shooting for 5 minutes. I did my dissertation research on Nubian prayer inscriptions at those temples in Lower Nubia. So Philae, Dhaka, Kalabsha, and then some smaller temples, Dendur and Dabod. This is one of the figural graffiti from the western exterior face of a portion of the temple complex at Philae called the Gate of Hadrian that just drew a large percentage of all the Nubian prayer inscriptions. And so just to riff off of what SHAYLA was talking about the importance of cattle, we see that in this corpus of inscriptions dating to the 1st to the 5th century CE, so considerably later than what SHAYLA's talking about. And this ritual role for cattle and the milk that they produce continues. And so here we see a boat that is taking the goddess Isis, if you will, in her cow form from her temple at Philae over to the neighboring island of Biga to pour a milk libation for her brother husband Osiris. And so there's even a little vessel there, Hess vessel, that with which we're told milk libations were poured at the grave of Osiris. So just for folks who haven't been to Philae, this is what the temple complex looks like, viewed from the front, the forecourt area on the right. And then on this image on the left, you can see jutting out from the main temple, here behind the second pylon, the Gate of Hadrian. And so on this outer western face is where that cow graffito was, but also all inside of that structure are Nubian inscriptions. So, of course, Nubia is there in the middle Nile Valley, and the images that I'm going to show you come primarily from Philae, but at the end I'll show you an image from the exterior of a bronze bowl found in a burial in Karanog. So this is at the Temple of Philae, and you can see here a cow-headed goddess, although her face has been defaced. But the inscriptions tell us that this is the Akhet goddess, and she's shown holding up and presenting two situli, their special type of loop-handled jar. And the inscription in hieroglyphs below it say very clearly that she is presenting milk. And so this is in a room that is just north of the so-called Meroitic chamber. And so it seems that perhaps that chamber was located precisely on the back wall where we see this image, because this image is present there. And although the Nubians are believed to, and they say explicitly, come to Philae and Dhaka specifically to perform rites on behalf of Isis and Osiris, there's a strong element of worship for the goddess Hathor, the cow-headed goddess Hathor as well. And so we see she has many epithets: Lady of the Sycamore and Goddess of Dance, Music, Sexuality, Motherhood, Childbirth, Divine Drunkenness, and the West as associated with the underworld. So very much present in all phases of life and many facets of worship. So we know that milk libation is a Nubian rite, and I believe that's what the brother earlier was referring to about spraying milk in the brother's faces, because I'm told that this continues to be part of marriage ceremonies in Nubia, but it has very ancient history. And so here are just some images from Meroitic controlled Nubia, Sedinga, from royal funerary chapels at Bejarawiyah, on the offering tables that were placed in front or inside of these funerary chapels, and then even a very specific milk offering formula from the Meroitic language that says something like, may you be offered good milk, with the word for milk being here, yer. These are just some images from the temples, Egyptian temples of Lower Nubia, showing this pouring of milk over an offering table, and those very same jars being standing up beneath the tables that make it very clear that it's milk that's being poured out as a purifying substance. And perhaps you can see here a couple of these Nubian prayer inscriptions engraved into the wall before the face of Osiris here at Philae and his sister wife, Isis, behind him. So then the final thing that I'll just show, and there's so many examples, but I was trying to do 5 minutes, is this bronze bowl that is now at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. And somebody has reproduced the decoration from around this bowl, showing a woman, obviously very high status, perhaps a priestess, who is being very graciously poured out milk into similar, one may assume, bronze bowls before her. And this milk has just recently been taken from the cows, who are also shown in procession before this woman. And I'd like to just close by pointing out the shepherd behind the cattle, who has his staff that he's using to drive the cattle, but then also that loop-handled jug that he's using to collect the milk in. And so milk and cattle are everywhere present in the Nubian ritual scene in the 1st through the 5th centuries CE. And I'll just close with that. Whoops. Did I stop sharing? I'm back. So perhaps I don't know if it makes sense to have us sort of continue going through our little flash presentations and then do questions after, or if there are questions, I'm happy to do those.
Yeah, I don't have any question. I'm just wondering when we gonna write our book, Solange.
As soon as you're done with that dissertation, but yeah, yes, and amen, because we all need to know more about this cattle culture.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so long lived. And I think, as Iman alluded to, that it spreads beyond the Nile Valley. Like this is an Africa-wide phenomenon, and it's not even that large than certainly northeastern Africa, which I know.
It follows, like SHAYLA said, up and down the Nile Valley, so the north-south corridor, and then the Sahelian corridor as well, the east-west, right? And so we see, I don't want to say diffusion, because we know that people are coming, like Dima said, people are coming into the Nile Valley.
Right.
10,000 in 10,000 BCE, 12,000 BCE. And from the Saharan corridor, they're also coming up the Nile Valley. And so you have this convergence, and out of this convergence in this matrix, we see these traditions. Some of these traditions are still, in Mali, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal today. You see the focus on cattle, bulls in particular, for coronation rites, sacrifice, purifications, and so forth. We see that. So it's amazing to make these type of connections.
And one of the things that there was a very real and practical problem as these herds started to spread south into East Africa. You see kind of an interruption, and that's due to the tsetse fly. So everybody wanted some cows, but as people started to take these herds into areas where they had several different types of parasites, the spread kind of stops until you get an influx of cattle coming in through Ethiopia from like the Red Sea. Those cattle were more adapted to dealing with some of the parasites in the southern parts of the continent. And then once that happens, you start to see then those cattle, they just keep going all the way down to South Africa. But Iman had a question to
Solange.
Solange about the ribs.
Yes, I don't have any thoughts about that, Iman. Perhaps it's just the way that 3D structure could be depicted on a rounded surface of a bowl in bronze. That's kind of the best answer that I have. I don't know if folks have other thoughts about that.
What I would point to one thing, and it might be completely, and I can imagine that it would be unrelated, but Ellen Morris, she looks at an image that compares. So essentially, she's looking at an image where Lower Nubians were giving tribute. They were giving a cattle tribute to Pharaoh, and the image shows an Egyptian cow and a Nubian cow. And so the Nubians are bringing their tribute to Pharaoh. The cow has ribs, and the way Morris read that was that that's basically Pharaoh saying, well, the Nubians owe me some cows, but my cows are prettier your cows. I read it and I don't know enough to like really dispute it or support it, but she had that image of juxtaposed like the Egyptian cow with no ribs and then the Nubian cow ribs showing, and she felt like it was like maybe like a little bit of like, I don't know, state messaging, you know.
Digging at the Nubian cattle. Is that, I don't know if you remember, SHAYLA, but is that from Ramses II's temple in Nubia? I'm blanking on the name of that temple.
It might be, because that's when a lot of cattle, that was a period of heavy influx of Nubian cattle being given to the Egyptian state. There were always periods of Nubian cattle being brought into the Egyptian territory, but the period of the Ramses, that was a high influx of Nubian cattle into Egypt. So it could have been, but you know.
I love that image, if it is the one that Ellen Morris is writing about, because it shows how the Nubians were doing the modification of the horns, and that just ties into, you know, the Nuba people who that has still been traditional for them to modify and the horns. And Tombos as well.
Road from Tombos to Abu Fatma, you'll see it to this day.
Yeah. Yes. So that's super cool. And I don't know if you guys can see behind my head the museum exhibit poster from when we did the Nubian Studies Conference in Neuchâtel, that one from Kerma and all the crania. So, yeah.
And Iman asked a good question. I don't know if we're still waiting on Salim's presentation, but Iman asked a good question about the locations of the ISNS. The locations of the Nubian
all right. So you...
Well, all right. Here. Well, we'll get back to that.
All right.
Excellent. All right.
Okay. But let me just say, in terms of real quick, I know we'll talk about that. I know Meriwethic Studies conferences have been in the African continent. I think the last conference was scheduled to be at Khartoum in the Sudan, if I'm not mistaken. And so I know Meriwethic Studies conferences have been in the African continent, but Nubian Studies conferences have not. The next one is in Warsaw, Poland in 2 years. And so maybe that's a conversation that we can raise, right, in 2 years in Warsaw, Poland, right, about the conference being on the African continent. So, but very quickly, my presentation, and I don't want to take up too much time, really two key areas. What you all see, and I'm actually going to talk about that second, but what you all see, this is the presentation that I presented in Paris. We were there 2 years ago. The ascendancy of the Kushite kingdom of Kerma in the post-Middle Kingdom era. revisiting the second intermediate period, and so ancient Egypt. And so I'll talk more about that in maybe in about two minutes or so. My initial Nubian studies research was looking at the transformation of ancient Nubia or Kush, or even the Meroitic phase of the culture, from classical pharaonic culture and religion and spirituality and traditions and practices to Christianity between the 1st and the 6th century of the Common Era, right? And so even well before I came into graduate school to study Coptology, Coptic studies, Nubian studies, my training is also in early Christianity, and then certainly Africana studies and even Africanist scholarship. So a lot of what I did and what I do is transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary type work. So what fascinated me, I just posted a video yesterday of Deep Building, German Egyptologist, Nubian specialist, right, saying something that Drusilla Dungeon Houston said over 100 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. That ancient Kush was the cradle of Nile Valley civilization, and subsequently even ancient Greece and Rome. And so he echoes that sentiment in one of his videos. I posted that. So what was fascinating to me is, cultures and traditions that are as old as 10,000 and 12,000 BCE. Kerma Kingdom, easily contemporary with Old Kingdom Egypt, persisting to 1500 BCE, and then the Napatan and Meroitic period persisting another 1,000 years, and then certainly Egypt from the first dynasty until the conquest by the Ptolemies and Romans in particular. And so what I wanted to know is how and why did these ancient Nile Valley civilizations convert or appropriate or transmutate into Christianity in the first 5 centuries of the Common Era. So I wrote a book based on my dissertation, The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, Last Pharaoh. The other, rather long, the other subtitle, although it's not on the cover of the book, it's in the first cover page, Religious Encounters in Late Antique Africa. And so what I came upon was looking at a culture that some call the Balana culture. Other scholars have called it X group. Other scholars have called it post-Meroitic, right? And then certainly the ethnonym for the people are the Nubians, right? And then even their counterparts, the Blimis, right? And so we're looking, my work looks at the 4th to the 6th century and how Christianity begins to come in. Certainly, Christianity begins to come into Egypt in the 1st century of the Common Era. And in fact, the Egyptian church or the Coptic church is the oldest ecclesiastical institution or Christian institution, church, right, in all of Christendom, right? Mm-hmm. And so we really have 4 ancient African Christian traditions. The North African church in what is now Tunisia, Algeria, even Libya, and so forth. Certainly the church in Egypt, the church in the Sudan, what was called Nubia, and then the Ethiopian church. And so as early as the 1st century, Christianity is coming into the Nile Valley via Egypt. And so there are Coptic merchants and Coptic monasteries on the border near Aswan, Philae, or Syene, who are beginning to introduce Christianity into Nubia. So why is this even a big deal? Because conventional scholars said that Nubia was converted to Christianity in the 6th century, right? the Nubian kingdom in 543, Dongola, the Makuria kingdom in 563, and then Alwa, or what is also called Alodia in the south, far south Nubian kingdom in 580, right? And so I demonstrate, of course, that that process actually began as early as the 4th century, well before the 6th century, well before Byzantine missions of Justinian and Empress Theodora and some of the first monks, the monks that they sent, the monk Julian and Longinus, who take missions down into Nubia and so forth. And so what I discover basically, and of course all of this is laid out in my book, is that a little known Nubian pharaoh, right, or a king called Silko, is actually responsible for Christianity coming in to that part of the Nile Valley in the 5th century, around 450, 453 AD. He himself was a synthesis of Nubian culture, Meroitic culture, and even classical Kushite traditions and so forth. And then all of those traditions also absorbing and appropriating certain elements of Christianity. And so a lot of people, most people, when they think of this stuff, they think of it on a theological level or ecclesiastical level, right? In terms of theological pronouncements or church affiliation. But early Christianity in the Nile Valley, it was a cultural phenomenon as well. I mean, we had a culture that had been in existence for 4,000 years. And so that culture just doesn't go away. And many will argue that it still hasn't gone away even today in both Egypt and the Sudan, despite Christianization during the late antiquity period and then Islamicization from the medieval period to the present, right? These practices and traditions and customs. And so what we see in the Nile Valley is really these ancient traditions appropriating certain elements of Christianity, right? But yet at the same time maintaining their own cultural tradition. So one of the things I talk about, even in terms of Egypt, is that when we look at Coptic magical texts, for instance, and this shouldn't be surprising because Demotic magical papyri also do the same thing, right? You see invocations to Auset or Isis side by side with invocations to Mary. These are Coptic ritual texts. You see invocations to Jesus side by side with invocations to Harut or Horus and so forth, right? You see the invocation of Amun, right, side by side with Hebrew appellations or the Greek Zeus. All this stuff is in these texts, showing us that it was more of a a syncretic or a synthesis of these various traditions. And so in reality, it looked more like Santeria and Vodun and Candomblé, right? These African diaspora religions that we see in the Atlantic world, where Christianity becomes a veneer, right? Let's say Candomblé, and underneath the saints, underneath Catholicism, they're continuing Yoruba traditions, Orisha traditions. Well, it's the same in the Nile Valley, right? I'm invoking Jesus because I see him as a new Harut. I'm invoking Mary because I see her as a new Auset. We even know in the tombs that the Emery Kerwin excavated in the 1930s, right? These Bolana Kingdom tombs and mounds and so forth, right? They continue ancestral rituals, libations, invocations, yet they also found Christian paraphernalia in these tombs. So they found traditional, right? And we're talking about material culture. So they found the remains of reliquaries, which contain, they hold the remains of ancestors and saints alongside ancestral rituals and customs and so forth. They found all of this stuff side by side in Milana tombs and so forth, right? And so I flush all of this out in my book, and what I argue is that we see a continuity of ancient African traditions, even in the conversion or transformation process to Christianity. For me, beyond that, I think what's most amazing for me and I didn't see this when I first began this research, is really the mound building that the Nubian culture continued. We know there's mounds in Kerma, mounds at the Tankasi, right? Also the Meroitic period built mounds, but mound building, these are tombs which deceased monarchs were buried in, and with all their paraphernalia, crowns, jewelry, oftentimes with cattle, dogs, and so forth, right? And in these tombs, these mounds, which are really earthen pyramids. In some early scholarship, 100 years ago, the mounds are referred to as earthen pyramids, right? And so it was amazing to me that this Nubian culture, which is late, right, 4th, 5th, 6th century, they actually maintain the mound building architectural tradition from pre-dynastic Nile Valley civilization. The mound is the predecessor to the pyramid, right? Early dynastic Egyptians, or the early dynastic people of ancient Kemet, before they built the pyramid that we see at Saqqara, the pyramids of Khafra, Menkaura, and Khufu, right? Those great pyramids there. Well before they built those pyramids, 500 years before that, they were also building mounds and experimenting with mound architecture. So the pyramid actually evolved out of the mound. The classical superstructure in the Nile Valley, the most oldest, is not the pyramid, it's the mound. And so the mound would persist along with pyramids in Kush and Kerma. And what's amazing is that we would see this tradition last all the way into the 6th century AD. And so, which was amazing to me. And so I know oftentimes, even, back in the 80s and 90s, when we were coming through the African-centered movement, conscious movement, we were interested in Tasseti, because Tasseti is the predecessor, right, to First Dynasty Egypt. We were interested in the Kustul incense burner, and just the fact that the kingdom of Kustul gave rise to the Nile Valley. But I think what's even equally compelling is not only Kustul as the predecessor to ancient Egypt or Kemet, but also Kustul as the last pharaonic civilization as well, in the tradition of the Nubides. So we're talking, just imagine that. If we do Kustul, Tasseti, right, and those discoveries back in the 60s and so forth, we're talking about documenting from the 4th millennium BCE all the way until the 6th century AD. This is, right? And so for me, it's amazing. And so for these people to have continued to bury their monarch, both men and women, kings and queens, and also perform the rituals where the entourage basically is enlisted, right, into the spirit world with the monarch, right? So everyone, has to go. We see this, tradition early in the Nile Valley in both what is Kush and Kemet. We see it persisting all the way into the 6th century, right? And for me, because I also have interest in how this connects with the Sahelian corridor in West Africa, right? I think that it's late antique Kush and late antique even Egypt, right, that makes many of the connections with the rest of Africa, even as far south as the Horn of Africa, and even Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, all of that. But even west across the Sahel, Chad, right? The Benue River connecting with what is now Cameroon, what is now Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, right? And even going to north to Mali and so forth. And this is what I dealt with a year ago in the conference at UC Santa Barbara. Why are there earthen pyramids in West Africa? Why are there mounds in West? There's thousands in Senegal and Mali. Thousands, right? Because this geographical region was also contiguous with the Nile Valley in terms of trade, commerce, and migrations going back and forth from both and so forth, right? So my research, especially the roots of Nubian Christianity, it deals with all of this. Not only the transformation of the culture to Christianity, but I argue that the Nubian culture was a derivative of classical Kushite traditions pre-dynastic. And for me, it's the foundation of both what became Kerma Kush and also what became dynastic Egypt. So I argue in my book very forthrightly that the classical foundation for Nile Valley culture are these classical Kushite traditions from the Sudan, which Kerma and Kemet both build upon, right? Just very quickly, the ascendancy of the Kushite kingdom of Kerma. Now we know Tristan, Solange, and Deborah, SHAYLA, the notion that that somehow there were only black pharaohs in the Nile Valley during Egypt's 25th dynasty.
No, that's not true.
That's not true, right?
That's not true.
I mean, all the monarchs, the people, kings, men, women, traders, farmers, they weren't African people. They were dark-skinned and black-skinned people, both in Kush and Egypt. But there's also the notion that the only time Kush came to prominence in the Nile Valley politically was the 25th dynasty, right? This notion, and that somehow Kush is a replica of Egypt. Kush is some pathetic imitator of Egyptian traditions, right? This, of course, is a major historical fallacy, and the second intermediate period and the Middle Kingdom in Egypt is another historical period that blows those misconceptions out of the water, so to speak, right? Because during the second intermediate period, which is the period following the collapse of the Middle Kingdom, so the collapse of the 13th dynasty, we're talking maybe 1700 approximately to 1500 BCE. Ancient Kush is the dominant power in the Nile Valley. Not only that, it is controlling politically, economically, trade, not only in what is Wawat or Lower Nubia, but certainly Upper Nubia in the heart of Kerma, as well as Upper Egypt as far north as what the Upper Egyptian capital of Nekhen, which Greeks called it Hierakonpolis, right, the city of the hawk, and so forth. So we're talking about from at least from Nekhen, even up to, which the Greeks call Abydos, all the way south to the Kerma Kingdom, right, in the Third Cataract region. The Nile Valley is being controlled by the ancient Kushite Empire, right, during the second intermediate period. And so this is the paper that I submitted for publication for our Paris proceedings. We don't pay enough attention to the second intermediate period, so-called, in ancient Egyptian history, in particular, ancient Kemetic history in particular, is a very fascinating period in the Nile Valley that we pay little attention to for a number of reasons. Even in terms of religious history, there's some interesting things going on in terms of the Canaanite dynasties in the north, the 14th dynasty, but that's another different conversation. But even beyond that, the so-called second intermediate period, I argue, should be retitled. It should be another period of Kushite dominance, another period of Kushite preeminence. But like, how come we get to these intermediate periods, right? And we call them intermediate periods? No, let's call them what they were. Kushite dominance. Kushite preeminence, right? Because when we call it second intermediate period, and many of us, right, you know, in my younger days in studying Nile Valley history, right, I do Old Kingdom, right? You skip over the first intermediate period. Middle Kingdom, you skip over the second intermediate period, you get to the New Kingdom, right? But these intermediate periods are chronological labels that have been attributed by Egyptologists and so forth. But if we allow them to, they cover up, if you will, significant historical periods in the Nile Valley. And for the second intermediate period, it's Kushite dominance. And I don't want to detail, but we have tons of material evidence. We have inscriptions left at the fortress of Buhin, where Egyptians are saying that they serve the king of Cush, right? These inscriptions, right? The famous Buhin Buhin inscriptions at the Buhin fortress and so forth, right? We have Thomasis, right? 17th dynasty, Upper Egypt, right? He's saying, look, saying to his royal court, look, we're going to continue to allow Cush to rule us in the south, and the Hekakasut, or the so-called Hyksos in the north. Y'all cool with this? Y'all just going to sit here and allow these people to rule and just rule Egypt like this, right? And so we have inscriptions, or we have epigraphy, we have documentary sources that's clearly pointing to Kushite preeminence in Upper Egypt and all of the Sudan. We also have a Kamosis documentary source where they intercept an emissary from the Hyksos. The Hyksos are writing the Kushite pharaohs saying, look, let's unite, let's work together so we can rule Egypt, right? So we have tons of documentary sources. Other inscriptions I could talk about, this Sobek Nak tomb of 17th dynasty. They're complaining. They're saying, look, Kush is powerful, and Kush has the ability to unite C group people in Lower Nubia, the Magi, Wawat, and create this Kushite federation and to rule Egypt, right? And so what I argue is that's why the fortresses were built during the 12th dynasty by Senwerset I and Senwerset III. It wasn't colonialism. They were afraid of a Kushite federation invading Egypt and taking over the Nile Valley, right? And so I'll stop right there. We could talk more about this with our peers. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. That was good. So we have Tristan and Anne and Deborah left. Tristan, did you you gave your presentation to Dima?
I'm supposed to submit it to Dima? Okay, I was gonna share my screen. I guess test my luck, or you want me to send it to her?
Okay, if you can share, and then if it shows up, let's try it.
Okay, let's see if I can be lucky.
Yeah, inshallah.
All right. I see the share screen option. Okay, sharing screen is easiest with sharing on a good computer. Okay, share screen. Some screens let you share audio. So I'll just read it before. Okay, so your entire screen. Okay. Share audio as well. So your entire screen, application window. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, so how are we doing? Oh, shoot.
You still look like a fine young man.
Screen. All right, application window. Okay, all right, and then I go. So, Deem, I'm seeing. So, do I go into the PowerPoint then?
It should take you in there if you.
So I should select it. All right. Okay. All right. How are we doing?
We don't see it. We're not seeing it yet. Oh, okay. Here it comes.
It's good.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Three times the charm. All right. All right. So this is, I'm just going to go over very briefly because I really want to get into open discussion about this. So Solange and I, at Paris, we presented a presentation on Nile Valley resistance against foreign invasion, as the title, as you can see on the screen, because I think it's important, or we think it's important to emphasize the political implications of the cultural relationship between the people of ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia as well, because this is something, and Salim, as he was closing his presentation, mentioned this sort of Black Pharaoh's moniker that sort of haunts the way that we look at ancient Nubia, and also how we misread ancient Egypt. We sort of whitewash it, or this is a term I heard recently, black rinsing it. I like that concept. So those types of things. So we address this here. Just going to give a very brief overview. So just to put it in perspective, the extent of these resistance movements. So, for example, we have here, and you can see this chart. Okay, sorry, I see something on my screen, but I don't think you guys see it. It's just the sharing. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by things I shouldn't be. Sorry. So, anyways, in terms, so you can see from the charts, there's a very consistent history of Nubian and Egyptian resistance against people from outside the Nile Valley. So we have the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, then we have even into the Arab enslavement period. So, and you also see religious resistance, which Salon talked about in Paris, some of the implications looking at Philae and the offerings and the involvement by the Meroitic leaders, so, or Meroitic rulers, I should say. So what you're seeing, and what I want to emphasize in all of these levels of resistance or instances of resistance, really more than coincidences if we're really looking at it, all of these leaders at some point fled to Nubia. Whether you're talking about Tantawatamani, of course, he was one of the pharaohs from the Kushite period, but you also see this with Nectanebo II, the last indigenous ruler of Kemet, which we know today as ancient Egypt. But I think it really becomes Egypt when you start to see the Ptolemy, because I look at names as also sociological, not, you know, just neutral, right? So I really think it becomes Egypt when the Greeks take over under Ptolemy. And during the Ptolemaic era, there are several revolts, but the best documented one is the one that occurred in Egyptian Thebes. The two succession leaders, Hornefer and Onquenefer. And this occurs roughly within the reign of Ptolemy VI. All right. So one of the comments before I want to really, because again, when it comes to the Ptolemaic period, and so Lodge and I've observed this, Salim and I've observed this, I know we've had this conversation. It's very hard for scholars to look very politically honest about this time period in the history of Egypt. Or maybe honest isn't the word, but yeah, I'll say politically honest. I think we tend to get wrapped up in, oh, everything is multicultural, there's no identity issues, very sanitized view and not a very realistic, or we don't ask very good political questions. Maybe there's better words for it, but it's very hard, in other words, to see the Greeks and Romans, their presence in Egypt, as reflecting colonialism of any kind. So I have this quote here by Cabral, because much like Salim does, you know, bringing in Africana concepts, concepts from Africana studies to re-examine the way we look at Nubian antiquity and also other African societies. I think Cabral's point, in fact, this is where I really see Africana studies, Africology, the various nomenclatures for Black studies. I think this is really where our scholarship becomes relevant when you're studying not only antiquity, but now and seeing continuities, because you can see what Cabral is saying about what colonialism is that what it does is that it takes over or represses the cultural life of a people that are colonized. But at the same time, there is also a group of the population that is in resistance. So what you have is you have an elite class that is co-opted by the colonizer, and obviously they're in favor of assimilation because, right, their income status or wealth status is implicated by that. But there's also a popular mass or a dominant mass of the population that has a cultural consciousness and that is more likely to resist the colonial imposition in various ways. And I think this is the way I want to frame the way we think about the Greeks and the Romans in Egypt, but we're just going to highlight the Greeks in particular. So with the Ptolemaic situation, that Cabral quote in mind, just for those who may or not be familiar, when we look at Alexander the Greek, and I said the Greek for a reason, he really just defeats the Persians in the 4th century, but one of the things, and this is going to what I was saying earlier, this view of Alexander as a good imperialist. Yes, I've heard that. I've read and heard that. This type of way we idealize Greek figures. When I look at Alexander the Greek, I just look at him the way I look at Napoleon as an imperialist and Hitler. I don't see any fundamental difference. Yes, there's a historical situational differences, but conceptually speaking, not really. So Ptolemy, we know how it goes. He takes on Egypt after Alexander's death. And what I want to highlight, why I say Alexander's imperialist, because even though he defeats the Persians, and I think this fact, this very simple common sense fact that tends to go over the heads of the scholarship is, if he's really about liberating, quote unquote, the people of Kemet, why can't they just be left to rule themselves, right? Very simple question that just doesn't get it's just mind-boggling to me. But it's important to understand in this period, the Greeks systematically imposed themselves onto what is now called Egypt, right? So Greek becomes an administrative language. When you look at certain documentation, when it comes to identifying people, you have indigenous and Egyptian people taking on Greek names. So for a contemporary comparison, you may look at, say, what is still going on in South Africa between, the white settler population and the indigenous African groups there. So again, I don't run from modern and ancient comparisons. I think it's more of a situational thing. I don't think we can't compare. I think the comparisons enhance the way we think about what's going on. So I just want to give that political context. So one of the things that, and I think Solange really hit home in her presentation and in the paper, is and this is something we both talked about, is this tendency to gloss over the fact that, and I know Salim touched on it earlier, so I don't want to dwell too much, but the fact that you're dealing with people two groups of people, two ethnic groups, if you will, who come out of the same cultural context. So their view of themselves in relation to each other is going to be fundamentally different than how they view themselves in relation to, say, in this case for our conversation, the Ptolemies, the Macedonian Greeks, and the other groups from outside the Nile Valley, from outside the African continent, right, is very different. Part of it is, well, culturally opposite. This is not the case with the people of Nubia. And one of the most obvious examples is the primacy of Amun in both traditions. Amun is a divinity that is relevant both in Kemet, into even the Ptolemaic Egyptian period, and even into Roman colonization period. But he's also relevant to the people of Kush. So we have here Taharka, just for example, offering Ma to Amun-Re in the ram head form. And it's believed that Amun in the ram head manifestation may even in fact have specific origins in Nubia itself. I know that's still debated, but just to emphasize how close the association between this divinity amongst people of ancient Nubia and people of ancient Egypt is. And it sort of speaks to that shared tradition that he's more like a transnational divinity as opposed to, an ethnic specific divinity. And this has implications for whenever we're discussing the way, because one of the things I mentioned in my introduction, I'm very drawn to the way that, or I address the way that we conceptualize the cultural interaction between people of Nubia and people of Egypt, this sort of rigid dichotomy, as opposed to acknowledging the cultural sharing or transnationalness of certain aspects of their cultures. And then here again, we have Amun in the Meroitic period. We have Arkamani at Dhaka. We have here, again, you see Amun. I really like this. This is one of my favorite ones. Of Arkamani at Dhaka is my favorite because I really like Arkamani's headgear. So I have a fascination for headgear. Since I got locks, I can't wear my fitted caps anymore. So you have to excuse my enthusiasm. But you see the main point is you can see they share a very critical divinity in common with each other. So again, you're dealing with, so to sum it up, you're dealing with people of Egypt in an oppressive colonial condition, and then you have their neighbors to the south who are not in an oppressive condition, large part due to the Kandaki's ability to repel both, to some extent, the Greeks and, we know, more notably the Romans. So I think that's very important also to remember. But in that context, that you're also dealing with people of the same culture. So you're dealing with people dealing with colonial conditions in Egypt, and then you have their neighbors to the south who are in an autonomous situation. So you can see why alliances would make logical sense, or why it's unsurprising, rather, I should say. So going into the Thebaid succession itself, just to say very briefly, the two leaders I mentioned earlier, Horwanefer and Ankhenefer, I'm giving their Kemetic names, not their Greek names, because it just doesn't, it's not appropriate in my view. So I have their succession dates. What's important to emphasize with this succession, I call it a succession because Thebes really becomes a state of its own. A contemporary comparison, I would say very loosely, I would say is Biafra in what we know today as Nigeria, the Biafra secession or attempt at secession. Depending who you ask, that would be a good contemporary comparison. That's what's going on with Thebes, because it goes back to Cabral's point, right? You have people who uplift their own culture and politicize around it and resist the colonizers, right? And this was an effort at resistance and a form that took succession into a separate state. Unfortunately, you know, it was defeated, but what's key for our purposes is that Meroitic Nubians were critical in the alliance for both rulers. In fact, Ankhenefer, in the midst of a loss, a battle loss, was able to flee to Nubia, to Meroe, and then return back to fight again, though was eventually defeated some years later, as you can see by the dates that I have up. So again, what's important to emphasize is that you have leaders that have a very clear nationalist outlook and a very clear cultural consciousness. And I think that's evident by their ability or their decisions to ally with the Nubians of Meroe. So to conclude, this brings us to this question of legitimacy. This is something, again, I've probably reiterated, but I will really hammer home this issue of how we frame legitimacy in academic discussions about Nubia and about Kemet/ancient Egypt. In the case of the Theban revolt, most academic literature, I think our paper might actually be exceptional. Anyone of my co-panelists can correct me on this, but I strongly suspect that it's in our paper that you'll see this. We don't look at the Thebaids as rebel pharaohs because we recognize, well, it's really Solange that recognized it more than I did, because that's how often you read it. It implies somehow that the Greeks, the Ptolemies, were legitimate, even though they're settler colonists, as I was explaining earlier. But the actual indigenous rulers who are allied with Nubians who share in the same exact culture, right, who are uprising, they're somehow rebels, right? Very interesting point to make. But also, it's important to emphasize the Nubian religious involvement. One of the issues is that it's always seen that Nubians need to seek legitimacy from the people of Kemet, or in this case, Egyptians under colonialism in Greco-Roman Egypt. But what this ignores is the fact that you have people who are of a shared common Nile Valley tradition. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't variances and situational and ethnic nuances between them. I'm not erasing that, but there's an overall common cultural core that I would argue transcends that or informs that very variance. You can have both and at the same time, and I think we do. And I think that wraps it up. Was I good for time?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
You know, not only not only are they labeled rebels, they're labeled un-Egyptian in the mainstream literature and the Ptolemies during that period are called Egyptians.
Really? Oh, okay.
Right? We see that. We see, Ptolemaic Egypt is Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And they're fighting Uncle Nefer, Harun Nefer, and these somehow they're not really Egyptians. So not only are they rebels, they're not really Egyptians either. Right? You that innuendo is all throughout the literature. It's ridiculous.
Oh, okay.
I mean, for the reasons that Tristan has identified.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, sorry, I don't want. I just wait. I think I had it. I hope I saw Iman's comment. I just hope. Okay, there we go. Okay, thank you. So Iman, do you consider Persian rulers as indigenous Egyptians? No, they're colonizers too. I know. I'm very because you know what it is. It's I'm just very frank about because we need to be. I don't have a rose-colored view of antiquity. It's very common of scholars of antiquity to kind of hold ancient cultures like children. Like, no, they're not into that. They're not into this. Let's not bring these concepts of nationalism. But it's just not functionally accurate. So why I would say, just to give you just to briefly answer the question, I would just say they're not indigenous people. It's just very simple. The Persians are imperialists, so is Alexander. That's how I would say it.
Well, that was my understanding. I mean, you're saying that you've read the literature on this and I have not, okay? But my understanding was that the Persians invaded Egypt. So how could they possibly have been indigenous Egyptians? And the same with the Romans. They invaded Egypt. The Greeks, these were all invaders and colonizers. And this is something that I assumed that everybody agreed on, but you're saying no.
Nope.
People are not agreeing on that. So that's a surprise to me. That's all.
So do we move to Anne? Is that the perfect segue?
I guess. Good. Good. Because Salim, I also want to, now you probably said this, but I missed it. But it was also my understanding from 2 or 3 archaeologists that I've spoken to that the pharaoh who reunited the 2 lands after the first intermediate period and introduced the Middle Kingdom was from the south. And may very well have been a Nubian. So this is what I learned,
Intef, the first.
Yeah, Mentuhotep, I think it was. Hold on. Yeah, Mentuhotep. Yeah, so you know more about him than I do.
Was it Amenemhet the first?
It was the second. It was
the 11th dynasty is
Neb-Hapetri Mentuhotep.
Mentuhotep the first. Yeah. And then their predecessors too, the Intef pharaohs.
Were they also from the south?
Yeah, they were also from the south. And
so the Middle Kingdom, I haven't read anything about the Middle Kingdom. I've got a book.
This conversation. The Kushite Wawa C group imprint is all over the Middle Kingdom.
Okay, that was what I was hoping you'd say. Yeah.
Hathor traditions and dance and Hathor priestesses, Nubian influence. I look at martial. What was fashionable for Egyptian men in the Middle in terms of military regalia, right, and attire. It was all Kushite.
Okay.
Right? So even the Medunetter symbol for soldier, the ideogram, the iconography is a Kushite soldier. Right? And so martial culture, dance, the imprint, and not only that, they fought in the civil wars during the first intermediate period before the consolidation of the 12th dynasty and the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. The civil wars of this first intermediate period, right? The involvement of Kushite soldiers, as well as Wawat C group, as well as the Magi, it was dominant. even Amenhotep, Shayla, even Amenhotep the first is an Egyptian of Nubian ethnic heritage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is agreed upon by archaeologists now?
There is, diverse opinions and perspectives and viewpoints,
Oh.
right? But for me, based on my reading of the literature and looking at material culture, that's the conclusion that I arrived and argue for, right? But
Okay, yeah.
it's not um, unanimous. But I think the evidence,
Mm-hmm.
material culture,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on at that time is overwhelming. The influence of both Wawat and Kush.
Okay. Okay. Good. Glad to hear that. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about my research. It's modern Nubia, and it's Egyptian Nubia rather than Sudanese Nubia. But I want to well, one of the reasons that I went there was not only to try to find out how women in a Muslim society live and work, but also I was wondering if there were any leftovers, any whatever you call them, from ancient Nubia that were not Egyptian and were not Islamic. If I could find some, and I found a couple of them, and so that's what I want to talk about in the short amount of time that I have. First of all, women in Nubia had the right to make their own money. So if they could find a way to make money on their own, they could do it. I think one of the misconceptions about Muslim culture is that women don't have the right to make their own money. But among the Nubians, they do. And this comes, I think, from pre-Islamic um, traditions. Another one is that women arrange the marriages in the village. I think that we have the stereotype that it's men who are the more important actors, and that men arrange all of the marriages and all that. But in Nubia, it's the women who initiate the arrangement of marriages. And they do this mainly because they're the ones who know more about the intimate relationships between people. They know what the personalities of their daughters and sisters are, and their nieces or whoever, and they know the personalities of the young men, so that they're more able to suggest to each other that, my son should marry your daughter, for instance, or my daughter should marry your son. And men at this point are not involved in this at all. Later on, they become involved in it. And that, I think, also is a pre-Islamic condition from ancient times. The last time I heard Solange talk, she talked about how in ancient Nubia, children are referred to by their mother's names. And that still goes on, as a matter of fact. At least in the village that I lived in, children were referred to by their mother's names. Now, I think that as little boys get older, they begin to refer to themselves by their father's names. But remember, this was in pre-Islamic times, this was a matrilineal society. Now it is a patrilineal society, but they still maintain some matrilineal things that they do. Those are the three things that I really wanted to emphasize. Building the house too. They call it building the house, but women take over. They use their husband's money, but they take over the planning of the house, that their husbands have a house already. But when women move into the house, they immediately start thinking about enlarging the house. adding on extra rooms, doing things of that sort, painting, whatever, just to make the house larger, bigger, more beautiful. And the women call it building the house. They say, I built this house. And they would take me over to the house that they built. And they'd say, Annie, look, this is the house I built. And in fact, they did all the work of the planning, and they hire the workmen, and they have to feed the workmen twice a day, and they have to bring tea to the workmen 3 times a day. So even though the money does come from their husbands, they consider themselves to be the ones who build this house. And that's got to be a pre-Islamic thing, it seems to me. So basically, those are the things that I wanted to talk about here. If anyone has any other suggestions, please feel free, or questions you'd like to ask me. Oh, Ahmed, really? Okay, well, that may have happened in pre-Islamic times, but now, no. The property is owned by the whole family, so everybody owns the property. And if a decision has to be made about the property, men are not the ones that make the decision alone. And women aren't the ones that make the decision alone. They make the decision together. And women do have objects that they do hand down. Usually it's jewelry. And they hand these things down to their daughters. But in terms of property and houses and stuff of that nature, that's always owned by the whole family.
So one of the things that I read was that those things really started to change with the influx of Arab travelers who started to marry into Nubian communities, before the official spread of Islam, was that property rights were matrilineal, but changed over the course of generations with the influx of intermarriage. But I also wonder if that has to do, or if that's related to the fact that Nubian churches, several Nubian churches had women patrons. Like women had actually paid for the church to be built. And I'm trying to think of where I read this, but there were 2 areas once the early church started to have a more international presence. There were 2 areas that were causes for concern with how people were expressing Christianity. One was Anatolia and the other one was Nubia. In both areas, they felt like women had too much political power within. They didn't like that. They didn't like the fact. These were the 2 areas where the expression of Christianity was coming across as kind of woman-centered. It was Rome. It was kind of a cause for concern. But I will say, this also, what you just said in your presentation, reminds me of a moment when I was in Tumbos and I was having a meal with a family. I got invited and I went to the house. And when I went into the house, the women were in the back getting everything ready. And the men were kind of socializing in the front. And, in Tumbos, they call me a half man. So I'm not always sure what to do. So I just ask, if I'm not sure what to do, I'll ask. And so I asked with no value judgment at all. I asked the host, I said, well, do you want me to go in the back with the women? He said, I'm not sending you in the back. You my guest. He said, if we were Arab, I would send you in the back with the women. We're Nubian. So because you are a woman, and I was like, ooh, right. But he was like, I invited you to my home as my guest, which means that you're going to, sit with us as our guest. And there's always once the meal is done, then the women come out and they get their chance with the guests to like talk and socialize.
Sure. Yeah.
But I was taken aback that he said it was a function of Nubianness.
Mm-hmm.
So he was saying like, no, this is our Nubianness that you are going to sit here as the guest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I always felt more comfortable with the women. So I always used to go and sit with the women, even, when I went to have dinner or anything like that.
So, and I think you all have about 3 questions, and one of them, I
Okay.
think, made somebody mad.
Uh-oh. I don't. Oh, okay. Is this one from MedJ? I wonder why they changed these matrilineal traditions. It was just perfect. Is it because of Islam? I think that a lot of it probably is because of Islam, but also a lot of it is just changing. Cultures change all the time. And there were matrilineal societies throughout Africa, and they changed over time. Matrilineal societies in Asia as well. But as time went on, these things changed. Maybe because of the influx of other peoples, but maybe for other reasons. And I don't think that matrilineal societies are just perfect, just as I don't think patrilineal societies are just perfect. But, that's the way I like to look for matrilineal traditions in every society.
I'll just jump in and take Iman's question about do they retain any pre-Islamic beliefs. I can't speak to the current Nubian populations, and maybe Anne, you can chime in, but that's what I was trying to show in my presentation, like that focus on the sanctity and the purifying power of milk from the cows is something that kind of comes all the way down through Kerma, down into this Meroitic period that I was talking about. And I have read that there was a tradition that a Nubian widow should go visit her husband's grave, I think every day for 40 days. And on a specific day, perhaps day 2, she should pour a milk libation for him, among other rites that needed to be performed. And so I don't know if you can riff off of that, and with the idea in mind that we have 7 minutes left for Deborah.
Oh no. I did not see that. But I did see some. There was the honoring of the Nile, the using of Nile water, and the dipping of the child into the Nile when it's 7 days old, that kind of thing. I did see that. But I believe that pre-Islamic beliefs are fading, unfortunately. But they're still there. Some of them are still there.
I can jump in and say one more that I love to see both in Aswan and when I was in Kuru was the laying of the palm branch on the burial, like a freshly buried. And then he just calls back the decoration in the Meroitic royal funerary chapels where the mourners are shown in procession and they're holding palm branches. So there is a connection there with, if you will, life or being the blessed dead. And this is the kind of thing that Native Nubians could tell us more about, but I do see that connection there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I didn't see that in the village either. And I think that's an Islamic thing. Women are not permitted to go to the burial ground. So I was never able to actually see people being buried. So
yeah,
I think that's Islamic.
The Spalding book there, yes. And then the other thing is food. So I don't know if you've ever had turkeen, but turkeen is one of the most ancient recipes that we actually find on the Turkey is one of the most ancient recipes that we find. It dates well before the Islamic period. So I think it's really fascinating that people eat turkey today. We can actually get the fermentation residues off of pots. I think going back like maybe about 6,000 or 7,000 years since Randy Holland's research. So
what exactly is turkey?
it's fermented fish.
Ah, okay.
And it's mixed up. You can mix it with like garasa, or you can mix it with other types of food. But the main ingredient in the turkey is the fermented fish. And so because of the chemical nature of it, we can get the residues off of pots, so we can test for turkey, and it's extremely ancient. So it's really cool that this dish has just lasted millennia, and it's a pre-Islamic tradition.
Fascinating. Okay, well, one little thing also that I noticed is the head covering that men wear, at least in the past, when I was there the first time. You know, they were wearing their emmas, and they wear them exactly the way you see statues of the ancient Egyptian men wearing, the pharaohs usually wearing their headdress. It's exactly the same thing. I was struck by that.
Wow. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, can we pass this off to Dr.
Wait, there was another question. There was a question about what if the Nubian man doesn't like the girl? That's it. That chose him, who chose him. Well, they do talk to their sons and nephews before they actually go through the ceremony. So the mothers of the two get together and they talk about whether or not they want to do this. And then they do take it to their husbands, and their husbands talk about it. And then they take it to their daughter, the girl, and they find out if the girl is in favor of this marriage. And if everybody says yes, then they go to the boy and they ask him if he's in favor of it. And, you know, if any one of them is not in favor of it, then they stop and they find somebody else. Usually, I mean, this is the ideal. It doesn't always happen that way, but, you know, this is the ideal anyway. Okay, well, that's all I have to say.
Okay, so Deborah, did you want to speak? And even if you don't want to go through the whole thing, give us the highlights.
Wait, Dima said since we're the last group for today, we don't really have time.
Oh, so you can
we
do as
have
much as you
time.
want, Deborah.
We're 2 hours in, and I'm. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I may have to stop the camera again. I
Yeah.
don't know.
But we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, you can hear me, or yes, I need to stop the camera.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear
Okay.
you, but
I'm going to stop the camera because I think that's slowing down my. Yeah. Right. Are you caught? There's a lag.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Are you caught up with me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So basically, I guess I didn't have a presentation. I didn't have a presentation for this. Like I said before, my research looks at the intersection between religion and politics as manifested in the temples to Amun and Epetimac in Upper Nubia. But in writing my dissertation, one of the things that I am increasingly interested in is how we talk about Nubia. How do we characterize Nubia? And I think that this panel has really brought, and it's probably good that I came last, because these are issues that I'm thinking about and writing about. So first of all, when we think about Egypt and Nubia, we always have to start with placing it within the African context. I said it before, I'll keep saying it because it seems like some people are missing the fact that Egypt and Nubia are in Africa. So you have to start there. If you think about going all the way back to the beginning of human existence, Homo sapiens evolved in Ethiopia. They populated the African continent first before moving out. The only landmass in Africa that connects to another landmass is north of Egypt. So when Homo sapiens was going out to populate the world, they had to go out through the Nile Valley, Egypt, unless they were coming from the west. But they still had to go out through Egypt. So from the very beginning of time, Africans have been the African continent first, and then going out into the world through exiling out through Egypt. That's the first thing. So the whole concept of Africanity goes back to the beginning of human existence. You start there. So then when we talk about the Nile Valley is what we think of as Egypt and Nubia. Before there was an Egypt and Nubia, there was this corridor, what we can consider the Nile Valley. So you have to think of the Nile Valley as a continuous, as a unit. Before we have these different political states or political entities, there is this landmass, this continuous landmass that flows with the river. The river flows from south to north. So how are people moving? How are animals moving? You look at the climate change after the last ice age. When we have the Holocene, the is melting and you now have rainfall that can move. The rain belts are moving from the south towards the north. There was very little rainfall in North Africa until the rain belt started to move. So as the rain belt started to move, you start having development of savannas. With the development of savannas, you have animals that are coming to graze in those savannas. As the animals are coming to graze in those savannas, you have people who actually hunt and live off the animals. They're moving with the animals. So as things are migrating, as the environment is changing and the animals are moving forward towards the north, people are moving forward towards the north. That is why I see the earliest types of nomadic settlements are coming from the south. So when you look at an Egyptian history book and they talk about the pre-dynastic or prehistoric settlements, prehistoric peoples, if you actually look at the map, those settlements or those areas, those activity areas are actually in Nubia because they're south of the cataracts. So again, you have to look at that interaction between what's going on in Nubia and what's going on in Egypt. These people are coming out of the same kind of cultural matrix. And they're developing separately, but historically, these are people that are connected. People are moving from the south to the north. People are also migrating east and west. So when you put it in that context, when you think about the long durée of African history, then that puts everything kind of in a different context. So when you start looking at the relationship between Egypt and Nubia, you understand that this goes back past these Kemet, Wawat, Taseti. These are people that have been interacting for over 1,000 years. As man is developing, people are just moving across the landscape. So placing the Nile Valley in its African context is essential. It's essential to understanding the history. It's also essential to understanding the culture. But the other thing that I've been thinking about is placing the Nile Valley within an East African context. So we have to start thinking more regionally. So it's not just the creation of a Nile Valley archaeology. We have to also start moving towards an East African archaeology that includes Ethiopia. Because this whole East African part of the continent, these people are interacting. So we have to start thinking about this in a more regional manner and stop being, and I'm not saying us, because I think that the people on the panel we're the ones that are starting to think about this in a different way. But this is our contribution to ecology, to Nubian East African archaeology, is this thinking outside the box, this tearing down these walls between Egypt and Nubia and Ethiopia. We have to start thinking more holistically. So that's one thing about it. But all of you have raised this issue just in various ways. SHAYLA, the work that she's doing with the cattle, this shows this in the most profound way possible. That people are domesticating cattle, people are moving around with the cattle. It's not just in Egypt, it's not just in Nubia, it's not just in Ethiopia. These cattle, the remains of these cattle are you see them moving around the continent, where they're not moving, by themselves. I mean, they can move, but I mean, there's this movement, there's herding that's going on. So you're looking at the people that are shepherding the cattle and moving them from place to place. Then you get to see how these cultures are developing and they're moving across the African landscape. So those are the things that I am, kind of not wrestling with, but those are the things that I am thinking about and writing about, is how we began to make Egyptology, Nubiology, East African archaeology, Ethiopian studies, how do we bring this into a regional unity? And how do we make or bring it into this concept of an African culture? Because that's the other part of it. We're having these conversations about decolonizing Egyptology and all these diversifying archaeology. But if you don't deal with the racism that disconnected Egypt from Africa in the first place, then you're just talking. But we have to deal with all of these different issues in order to move this study into a new phase. That's where we are now. We're moving Nubian studies, Egyptology, out of those categories into a Nile Valley studies. And so as we're doing that, we're tearing down these walls and reconceptualizing, reframing history, reframing culture, reframing archaeology. All of these things are being redone right now. So I think that this panel makes that very evident. Like, these are the new areas that are coming. These are the types of discussions that are going to be occurring in conferences from now on. So we're moving all of this into a new phase. And I'm done.
Good. Thank
you, Deborah.
Powerful, Deb. Yep, and that's absolutely true. I mean, if we're going to talk about decolonizing Egyptology, let's not make it a superficial job here. Let's really just go ahead and decolonize Egyptology.
I really felt Wait, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because sometimes I've had
Yes.
like very inconsistent with my Wi-Fi, so I'm somewhat paranoid. But I really, to Deborah's point about not just talking and Solange's editions, I always think about one of the things that, you know, I hope to see, since everybody's talking about decolonizing, for it not to be a trend, that we see the tangible support for, you know, critical scholarship on these issues. Because one of the things when I was doing my MA, and I got, let's say not a very strong positive reception, a few exceptions here and there, was one of the things I had argued is that for archaeology, for example, should have a critical race theory aspect to it, where we're interrogating whiteness in our research. And this was something that even Sally Ann Ashton for Egyptology had brought up. And then, you know, I was doing work in critical race theory, and that was what I was trying to work on, was critical race archaeology, right? I don't think that would have gotten, it would not have got, it did not get the reception. I always wonder what would have happened if I was writing now. I'm thinking, oh, I might have to dust it up. But more to Deborah's point, so I don't get off topic, there has to be an epistemological change. And if Egyptologists and scholars in Nubian studies don't want to do it, it's not happening. It's, so the choice is yours, right? Enough work and scholarship done by us to show, like, come on, common sense. There's so much common sense in it. It's just a matter of, there's no ignorance here. Do you really want it? That's what I would emphasize.
But it also, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think that instinctively, that's one of the things that has turned me away from Egyptology trademark. I feel like from the very beginning, it was a whole clique of people I wanted nothing to do with. So I just consider myself an Africanist, period, point blank. That's kind of my scholarly identity, is Africanist. And Egyptology hasn't sold me, because they just be over there talking nonsense. So I kind of feel like some of the conversations that we have had off camera have been like, okay, are they going to recognize our value? Are they going to recognize our contribution? Is Egyptology, and to an extent, you know, other areas of archaeology, are they going to appreciate what we bring? Because if they're not going to appreciate what we bring, then we build from the bottom up and let them catch up later.
Amen. Amen.
You know, for me,
Yeah.
we don't fight for significance. We're already preeminent.
Yeah.
We do not fight for significance. Are already preeminent.
I agree.
In the perspectives and the contributions that we make. Egyptology, you know, I'm trying to remember some of the names and so forth. But Egyptology knows that it was and it is a discipline that was created concurrently with the colonization of Egypt. Very much a colonial enterprise.
Yes.
Enterprise centered on the de-Africanization of Egypt and other civilizations. And so that's at the heart of it. And Deborah's right. It completely flies in the face of the science and not common sense. Right? The humans, the first bipedal species, Australopithecus, everything in between, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, even to Homo sapien, anatomical modern humans emerged from the African continent.
Yes.
And then walked from south to north, down the Nile Valley. Some of them went west and walked up and down the west coast, and then came in the Nile Valley from the Sahara and the Sahel and so forth, right? And so then they left through Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. And so to do Nubiology and Egyptology independent of this fundamental scientific basis to human evolution, human civilization, human society is is anti-intellectual, and it also flies in the face of common sense, right? And so for me, the issue becomes it's not anti-intellectual, because the science that has emerged in the Western world is mind-boggling over the past 4 or 5 centuries. Of course, we talk about oppression, we talk about white supremacy, slavery, colonialism, but I'm just talking about the scientific contribution. So it lets me know that this is not an issue of science or anti-intellectualism. This is a political decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
Political decision. It has nothing to do with scholarship.
No, because they didn't have any scholarship
You
at
know
the time.
You know the scholarship. How do we know you know it? Because
Yeah.
it's in the Museum of Fine Arts. It's in Penn. It's in Chicago. It's in Berlin. It's in the British Museum. It's in the Louvre. So you have the scholarship, you know. And so this misrepresentation, this falsification of human history, and the marginalization of African people in human history, when the African people are the progenitors of the human, right? It is a political decision. It is also an economic decision.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
So but we know some of our colleagues, some have put that aside and are pursuing the science and pursuing what is true and what is correct.
Yeah.
Right? We know that some of our colleagues are doing that, both Africanists and Nubiologists and Egyptologists, right? I'm thinking about for me, you know, I shouldn't be name dropping, but you know, I can roll with Stephen Kirk. Stephen Kirk, who's at the Petra Museum. Stephen Kirk.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
You know, I even think Eric is departing from that as an Africanist. I think Stuart Tyson Smith is doing that as well. You know, but these are a few names in a discipline that was forged in colonization and dehumanization of people of African descent. And so we are seeing an epistemological shift, and really, it's in our face, like Deborah said. Like the Nile Valley is Africa, period. Yeah. It's not disconnected from the Nile Valley. I'm sorry, the Great Lakes regions of Uganda and Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, and even further south than that, Zimbabwe. Right? Yeah. Look at the San people in Southern Africa. Yeah. Right? Oldest anatomical modern, right there in Southern Africa. Right, the San people, the Khoisan. Yeah. So forth. And so, and then even in West Africa too, we're seeing, and I mentioned earlier, which is another area, how these traditions were across the Sahel, the Sahel and the Saharan corridor. Why are there mounds built in the tradition of Kerma? What the hell are you doing in northern Nigeria, in northern Ghana, in Mali, in Senegal? How did you get there? Right? Fragmentation of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is Black Africa, White Africa, Africa.
Yeah,
right?
whatever that is.
All these are arbitrary, unscientific, unsubstantiated categories that Western scholarship has produced, and they have no meaning other than the repetition for the past 400 years.
Yeah.
Other than that, you have no weight.
And so to go along with what you're saying, there are 3 points that I wanted to bring up. One of them is where we have a lot of Egyptology, especially in these organizations. They break the study of Egypt into pharaonic Egypt and later periods. But when you do that, you neglect the true origins of Egyptian culture. So there's that's another aspect of removing the Africanity from Egyptian studies. When you focus on, if you just start with pharaonic history and you say that that's where your studies lie, then you're neglecting to talk about the origins
Yeah.
That's that disconnect. That's almost an institutional disconnect. When we're talking about the second point is talking about moving into a new phase. And people are critiquing people like Reisner and Petrie and all these early Egyptologists that basically said that the Egyptians were Caucasians, that the Nubians were Hamitic Caucasians, removing all Africanity from it. So we could critique that racism, but if you look at the videos that have come out in the past 2014 and one that came out in December about Kush. Again, we need a conversation about how do you even talk Kush? What are the terms that you use for talking about Kush? So this whole concept of the Black Pharaohs, and somebody brought that up. Well, we know that that's code.
Yeah.
Black as opposed to not black.
White or whatever. Yeah.
Not black means white, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't want to talk about the Black Pharaohs. We want to talk, if you want to talk about the 25th dynasty, call them the 25th dynasty from Kush. About the Sayite dynasty for the 26th dynasty. Why not the Kushite dynasty that's coming, the 25th dynasty? Why are they classified as the Black Pharaohs? But there's also this sensationalism in these videos. So they talk about, Nubia being underdog and overturning its masters and all of this kind of belittling kind of code words.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this and you hear master, the other word that you think of is slave. If you hear black, the binary is what you hear is white. So we have to start addressing how people are framing and talking about the Kushites. If we're saying we're moving into a new phase where we're talking about Nubian agency and, Kushites being an indigenous, independent, we can't be using the same old terminology that frames it as underdogs or, people that basically are serving the Egyptians. So that's the second point. And of course, the third point again is getting back to this term black. So when we talk about, again, not just about the Black Pharaohs, but then it's this whole argument, well, going back decades, Egyptians black. So black becomes there are two different kind of cultural concepts of what it means to be black. I call myself black. Myself in relationship with people world, as opposed to African American, which just situates me in the United States. But that's the way that I conceive of blackness. But when Egyptologists use black, they're looking for, and W.B. Du Bois talks about this in his works that he wrote on African history. They're looking at a very narrow definition of what it is. The darkest, the kinkiest hair, so all, if you don't fit that physiognomy, so that's how you can get away with talking about the Nubians being, they're not black, they're not Negro, they're Hamitic. So they're African.
So
and free.
Right. No, that's
that's what I think. Ethnicity is look.
We don't have to start
but that's important.
About how black was. Because Africa being the homeland of humanity, there is more genetic diversity on on the African continent than anywhere else because mankind has been there the longest. So we know that there are a range of colors, there are a range of hair types, there are a range of noses, lips. That doesn't mean that those people are any less African
Sure,
to the other. So again, we have to start talking about how is it that we're talking about Nubia.
And so,
and I'm off my soapbox.
So if I can kind of bring this around to where we kind of started at the beginning, where we were talking about, we mentioned that the field of studying Nubian studies is further along, more developed in Europe than it is in North America.
Is it?
Part of that, I feel, in my observation, is the politically motivated reluctance or refusal to situate Nubia and Egypt in Africa. So because there is less reluctance in Europe, that creates a home for Nubian studies in various academies. Like when you read papers on Nubia that come out of Europe and you look at the byline to see, okay, where was this produced? A lot of these, the scholarship is produced in departments that study Africa, but they're studying the Nile Valley in departments that are devoted to Africa.
Like Michael Jackson.
Yeah, but in the U.S., this hardline reluctance has left Nubian studies without a home because Egyptology departments won't touch Nubia, and African studies departments feel that the Nile Valley has been ceded to the Egyptologists. So it has left Nubian studies without a home. And you all know the story of an extremely famous Egyptologist that I thought about going to work with in graduate school. I made a comment to him, something about Sudan being in Africa, and he cautioned me. He said, you don't want to say things like that. If you go around saying things like Sudan is in Africa, people will think you're an Afrocentrist. This, as funny as this is, but this is why. So when you try to figure out, well, why is there no Nubian studies? Where do I go study? Where do I go learn? This is the boundary, this false boundary that has been created, and it is completely, it is very much at fault for the fact that Nubian studies is still struggling to find homes in all these academic departments. And so I kind of wanted to let that be kind of my final thought, is for people looking for a way in. Sometimes you can have an interest in Nile Valley culture, and you go the Egyptology route, and they're just like, yeah, so anything Nubian, anything beneath the first cataract is going to be tangential, and you need to learn Akkadian, and you need to learn, and I found this when, I was looking for places to study, and in a way that Nubia would not be relegated or marginalized. So I would say that that's what we kind of have to create.
Well, I mean,
so that's what we have to kind of create in terms of.
I mean, but the other
step is acknowledging that the entire Nile is on the continent of Africa, and then from there we have to create our spaces. And then finally, I wanted to acknowledge one of Iman's comments, where Iman is making a lot of great comments, but she talked about indigenous epistemologies. I kind of feel like we have to get the Africa part down first, which has been our struggle. so that we can actually open the floor and center those indigenous epistemologies. But we still dealing with people who are offended by this whole comment. We're still dealing with people who are offended by the concept of Egypt physically being in Africa. Never mind
Really?
culturally being in Africa. So
Africana studies and Africanist scholarship, I think that's why it's so important in how we approach Egyptology and Nubiology. I think, coming through both Africana studies and Africanist scholarship on the continent is important, especially Africanist archaeology, and even African diaspora archaeology should be a part of these Nile Valley conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for the question by Carl Watson.
And the other thing is, SHAYLA,
go for it.
So one thing that I wanted to add, though, is that when we talk about Nubian studies, up until recently, there were just a handful of people that were studying. So Nubia wasn't even considered important enough to study aside from Egyptology, and that in just the kind of roundabout way. So, I started studying almost 20 years ago. There were Tyson Smith, where UCSB, where you are, and I didn't even know him at the time. And then there, who else was there? Brenda Baker does the osteology, but she doesn't teach Nubian studies. There was really only a handful of people that were doing any work in Nubia. So there really wasn't for Nubian studies because there wasn't anybody that was actually able to teach and study it. It's only now that we're starting to grow as a group. So now is actually really thinking about where will I be? Are finishing PhDs now. You are the Nubians. Yes.
And
I'd just like to remind us all that remember in the 1800s when they first discovered the pyramids and all of those, and they were so impressed by all of that Egyptian history. And so they grabbed it and they started talking about it, but they did not go further south. So they never found the pyramids in Sudan. So they didn't realize that there was all that history in Sudan, in Nubia. And it's only recently, in comparison, that they have begun to discover all that and dig there and all of that. So it's understandable. I'm not saying that it's excusable, but it's understandable that they would have focused upon the stuff that they had instead of the stuff that they didn't have. And now that they have the stuff in Sudan and probably further south even, I think that they're going to start talking more about that. And they have started talking more about that. Yes, Solange, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say, for example, at University of Chicago, where I studied, they were really involved in the rescue excavation of Nubia before it was flooded by the Aswan Dam. And they have a basement full of amazing Nubian artifacts, and yet and still no one there teaches anything about ancient Nubia. So when I chose to do my dissertation focused on Nubian inscriptions, it all had to be self-taught, and then kind of sort of desperately throwing out lifelines to other scholars who would guide and mentor me. And I'll give a special shout out to Janice Yellen, who has been at every Nubian Studies conference and has been such an amazing mentor for me.
But
And
you're more modern. You're of the new generation. I'm talking about the older generation. Yeah, they said, and that Italian guy that went into the pyramids in Sudan and destroyed two or three of them looking for treasure and all of that. So there was always somebody doing it, but they did not accept it. You know, they accepted the Egyptian stuff, but they didn't
Well,
accept the Sudanese stuff because they just, I think it's just because they didn't know that much about it and they hadn't done the digging yet. But
But
now they're doing the digging.
well, I mean, but I'll have to mildly disagree
Okay.
because even the extensive excavations
Reisner,
were framed in terms of degenerate Egyptians.
yeah.
yeah,
So,
Yeah,
like when you
true.
look at
That's true. Yeah.
Reisner, you look at Petrie,
Mm-hmm.
um, even where excavations were extensive, racism was writing the narrative and the story.
Mm-hmm.
So they
Mm-hmm.
didn't even approach it with the same good faith or
Mm-hmm.
framework. And so to me, it was that political decision to even the backflips that Reisner did in
Mm-hmm.
order to try to explain why he was finding pyramids in places where there shouldn't be you know
Pyramids. Yeah. Yeah.
pyramids. So yeah, I have to be a little bit more critical of the founders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think by any means it was an accidental matter of just not going far enough. I think it was in some cases a deliberate choice to stick with an illogical framework that yeah, there was something not innocent there.
Yeah, well, no, I agree with you about that, and I understand that they saw even the Egyptian pyramids, and they said, well, black people couldn't have done this, So Egypt is obviously in Europe somewhere,
It's early,
So I know
it's
that they
early,
did that. That's true, but I think probably that my belief is that if they had seen the Sudanese pyramids earlier, they perhaps would have had to change their tune about all
yeah,
that.
as early as the 1700s, the Scottishman James Bruce is taking
Mhm.
to the Nile Valley, and then as Emily is right,
now, can I break in here?
Mhm.
Because I'm actually dealing with this. I'm writing this in my history chapter of my a lot of the temples that I am looking at for my dissertation were excavated in the early 1900s, and these are Upper Nubian temples. So Francis came from Oxford, excavate in the 30s. Reisner had already started excavating. He did the first survey of Lower Nubia in 1907, I believe. And then after that, in the 20s and 30s, he went down and he excavated all of the royal cemeteries. He excavated Kerma. When he excavated the fupa at Kerma, he could not believe that Nubian people built that. He said it was an Egyptian trade depot, and that this was a place for one of the New Kingdom officials built that and used that for purposes, political purposes, administrative purposes. So when he saw the pyramids and when they were excavating the pyramids, he basically thought, first of all, that these were not built by the Nubians, because he said these cannot be built by these people who he basically said that they were little more than staple of Sudan at that time. And he said these cannot be the same people that built these structures. That's one thing. But then the other thing is that when they started evaluating and looking at the structures, they basically characterized them as being ripoffs of Egyptian structures, degraded, debased forms of Egyptian structure.
Okay. Well, you guys know more about this
In
than I
their
do.
mind, a Nubian.
Gave them the benefit of the doubt. That's all. Because that's who you are. You were like, oh, they didn't mean it. Like, oh, they meant it.
We can't forget about the Africana intellectual tradition. Drusilla Dungy Houston, William Neal Lansbury, right? Du Bois, Martin Delany in the 19th century, right? There's an Africana intellectual tradition on both Egypt and Nubia that is distinct from the European or Western Egyptological scholarship as well as Nubian scholarship, right? And I posted today, like to hear Dietrich Wildum say in 218 what Drusilla Dungy Houston said almost 100 years ago in her book that came out in 1926, right? And she was reading Petrie, she was reading who else at that time? Reisner. She was engaged in all of that scholarship and research, right? And back then, she made push primary and fundamental to how you understand human history and certainly the Nile Valley as well. And of course, it was ignored, right, by the establishment, right? But now we're echoing what she said. Right, this Black woman born in the 19th century, right, ahead of her time. And not only that, one of my favorite quotes about her is that she says, look, I dare scholars at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton to prove me wrong. This is how Drusilla's talking in the 1920s. She said, I looked at the archaeology, I looked at the anthropology, I looked at the ethnography, I've looked at the history, I've looked at all the sources, I've studied I've studied Reisner, studied Petrie, all the prevailing. Is foundation and fundamental. And I dare any one of you to prove me wrong by the documentary sources in the science, right? She also challenged Black men, right? At that time, she said, and I challenged Black men, right? The intellectual elite and establishment at the time. Right? She said, I challenge you to prove me wrong as well, right? And really, the word she used was cowards.
Okay, Salim, what is this woman's name? Tell us again who she is.
Drusilla Dungy Houston.
Okay, Drusilla
Dungy Houston. Her classic book, The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire.
Okay, thank you.
So do you all, Dima asked, do you all want to spin off a very similar, or do you all want to spin off and have another conversation about this before Nubia Week is over?
Thank you, Deborah.
Yes.
I can't. I'm sorry, I can't.
So
I just need some specification. That's all. But
maybe we can do it.
You say what?
I just need time specification, but I should be able.
Well, yeah, I don't have a time specification, but we're going on 2 hours and 45 minutes. Dima was saying, you know, we can carry the conversation forward. So if we want to set up another panel to really, I guess, delve into where we want this to go.
Good idea.
What are the concrete steps that we need to see, you know, in order for this field to actually kind of like move forward?
True.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
I'm open. I am doing another panel on Wednesday, but I mean,
so we can talk about the I guess we can debrief afterwards and decide if we want to do a second part to this, future directions, in terms of like how we actually see what needs to happen in order for the study of Nile Valley civilizations to kind of break break these chains, you know.
Mhm.
Other than that, are there any final thoughts? Are there any burning questions that we did not get a chance to get to? I kind of feel like I didn't answer the question, how does one get into Nubian studies? Because it's quite complicated. I think even when we talk about it, the only advice is, well, it's different for every person. When I was an undergraduate, I was pointed to my advisor, my thesis advisor, Stuart Tyson Smith. And then I came to UC Santa Barbara to work with him because that's what was advised to me. He was one of the only people at the time who could advise a dissertation on Nubia, which was what people were telling me. And then I met him and it worked out. But it is very difficult. It was difficult for me as an undergraduate to figure out where I would go and do this. So I would say, depending on your field, if you are a historian, you're an Egyptologist, maybe you're an archaeologist and an anthropologist like me, or an anthropologist like Anne, I would say get as close as you can geographically into a program where you are supported, and then network your way into the Nile Valley. Several people have kind of like wiggled their way over from adjacent regions. And if you can get a background somewhere within the region, then you can work on opportunities to get put on digs and things like that, so that you can actually kind of slide into the Nile Valley from an adjacent area. Now, none of those things are easy, but as far as I know, like, you know, that's one of the pathways there. But what you want to say, Solange?
Do I get to say now that several of us on this panel are working to help create pathways to get Black students into this field? So, you know, I'm not going to take the wrapper off of it yet, but just keep close with us. It's in the works.
Good, good.
You know, the way you put it, SHAYLA, lets me know like how lucky and fortunate and blessed I was, because I never really thought about it as being complicated and difficult. I always reflect that at the time I was in graduate school and the mentors I met, it was cosmically fortuitous. It was ancestral. I was at the right place at the right time. Like, and had I not been in that window, I wouldn't have got it. So that's how I always see it. But the opposite side of that is difficult.
But the thing is, it should be straightforward. It's the political situation and the political stubbornness and belligerence that, like I said, is keeping Nubian studies from having a home. People are doing that on purpose. And so because of that, it's one of the only fields where you literally just can't go on Wikipedia and be like, how do I do this? You know, as a matter of fact, I think it's even easier for maybe students who want to do West African archaeology, because you can go into, you know what I'm saying, you can find specialists. With us, it has been made obscure by the weird politics of the American Academy. And so, yes, as Solange says, we're working on it. Brothers and sisters gonna work it out. We're working on getting through that.
And I'll just add that it's even deeper than that, that we have several museums in this country that have amazing collections of Nubian stuff, but it is all tucked away in the basement, and they use this circular reasoning that the public isn't interested in Nubia, so we're not going to put it on display, but the public won't know about Nubia until you
put it on display. Yeah.
So it's
and to answer Iman's question, I know a person, so hit me up later. All right, y'all. So I don't know if there's any final thoughts, but I just want to say that, you know, part of the bond that we share is that I think we have all developed such a deep, deep love of the Nile Valley culture. It's more than a job. It's more than a passion. It's just kind of, I think with all of us, it's just become this driving force.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's one of many reasons why we're willing to kind of put our time and effort into making these pathways clear and available and facilitating these pathways for the next generation of scholars, because we should not have to keep this to ourselves. Other people, including, and to me, including and especially Nubian descendants, should have these pathways available to them. And, you know, they should get to feel all this love too. And go to the Nile and touch that water, eat that food, you know, and they should get a chance to just experience like some of the most beautifully spirited people on earth. I cannot express. I had pictures that my PowerPoint didn't work, but I have pictures of all of my beautiful Tumbos friends. Doing research there has been a real blessing.
Mm-hmm.
People in those villages are so sweet natured that they have truly, truly embraced us. It makes me a different person. I feel like I come back and I am a different human, because that is how beautiful those people are inside and out.
You're right. You're right, SHAYLA. You're exactly right. Yes. Yes. It's like they're teaching us how to stop being Americans. You know?
And we need more of that every day.
Yeah. And, you know, that's what they taught me, you know. So
yeah, how to be human.
Oh my God.
And in my wife's language, the tree, Onipa, is human beings. Like culture is about, really, we know the power of Blackness in the U.S. context. And in antiquity, our power was our humanity.
Yes.
Our spirituality, our connection to one another, the earth and the cosmos. And so these cultures, right, in the Nile Valley, certainly other places on the continent, they remind us of this. Although all the images of Africa we see is poverty and underdevelopment and you know, and then the image of the Sudan and the Western imagination is not what SHAYLA just said.
Right.
Right.
You know, and so we have to remind people of that as well, right?
Yeah.
Human.
Yeah.
Humanity, our sense of community and connectedness with one another. That's
Amen.
powerful. And that's how we survive.
All right. So
if I can, I wanted to address Anissa's question, because she asked about people studying or doing research links between Nubian material culture and West African material culture. And Anissa, I want to say that is your contribution. We're talking about barriers and thinking outside the box. That is your area. So we want you to get in there and start making those connections. That's your contribution.
And yeah, you know what I'm saying? Go see them dervishes on Friday night in Khartoum.
Oh, that was so awesome.
Go see those dervishes on Friday night in Khartoum who are wearing Bogalam Fani. They're wearing Adinkra symbols. You know, they are decked out head to toe in cloths from the West and will dance all night. So if you go see the dervishes in Khartoum, that's an all-night party. They're gonna dance till the sun go down, but you see different West African textiles on their clothing. That's a whole dissertation right there for somebody.
Mhm.
Or somebody's dissertation is a horrible lifestyle. Just study it. Like, yeah.
I'm trying to figure out why I'm just now hearing this from you. I'm like, whoa, really?
Oh, I never told you about the dervishes. I have pictures, Salim. We'll talk because that was what I noticed was because I have a background in West African archaeology.
Yeah.
When I went to the dirt, I was like, why they got a dimper symbols on? They got mud cloth on. I was like, oh, they just doing this Sahel thing.
Yes.
Yes. So
yes.
that's a whole nother talk. We about
the ancient Nubian textiles also have a dimper symbol.
Really? Wow.
So we
telling me that today in Khartoum the
I got some pictures I'll share with you and we'll talk. So, but yeah, so I like you say, Deborah, the field, and I think that's the most important, the most exciting thing is that this field is wide open for your interests, for your perspectives, whether you're interested in the ancient past, the prehistoric past, the medieval past, the modern day historical era, or revolution in 2020. I mean, it just kind of like has everything for you to explore, and you get to explore this in a place where people are so open to kind of being a part of that exploration with you. So, you know, I have nothing but, you know, the best intentions and well wishes and, you know, advice for people who feel like this is something that they want to pursue. You know? All right, y'all. As always,
it's been fun.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. It was great.
Thank you, Dima. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dima.
Thank you, Dima.
Hello, Nubia.
Yes, thank you, Nubia.
Thank you.
Okay, so is she going to? Is Dima going to stop it?
Dima is joining.
Okay.
Thank you all very, very, very much for your time, for this knowledge, for this engaging conversation. Really, I think all of you thought you were coming in here for an hour, and all I can say is, ha! Jokes on you.
It's never only an hour with us.
This is just the start, more and more to come. This is at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing, for it to take away any intimidation of academia. At the end of the day, you're all doing what you're doing to help the locals connect, but also to share this wealth of knowledge and history and vast heritage with the entire world. And we are so, so very, very grateful. Solange, Tristan, I know you both have a call in like 2 minutes. So we will say thank you to all. Stay tuned. Please check the calendars on our website for Nubia Fest 2020. Follow the rest of the panels, and I will be getting in touch for the follow-up on Black archaeology in Nubia.
Is there a way for us to save this chat?
This is already recorded, saved. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, and we will polish it a little bit, and then it will be properly on both YouTube channels for the Nubia Initiative and Nubia Fest 2020.
Excellent.
Once again, thank you, and Afia Logo.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.